The tech company's headquarters in New York City buzzed with activity as employees hurried to their morning meeting. The conference room, with its sleek glass walls and modern furnishings, filled quickly. Tom Henderson, the department manager, stood at the head of the table, his presence commanding attention. Tom cleared his throat, silencing the room. "Let's get started," he said, his voice carrying a hint of impatience. He began outlining the team's new goals, his tone growing increasingly sharp as he spoke. "Our targets for this quarter are ambitious, but I expect nothing less than excellence from each of you." As Tom continued, his gaze swept across the room, lingering on certain individuals. His eyes narrowed as he focused on specific team members. "Some of you have been consistently underperforming," he remarked, his words laced with disdain. "I hope you're prepared to step up, or you might find yourselves looking for new opportunities elsewhere." The tension in the room was palpable. Employees shifted uncomfortably in their seats, avoiding eye contact with Tom and each other. Some frantically scribbled notes, while others stared blankly at their laptops, trying to appear busy and competent. As Tom moved on to discuss individual projects, he began singling out team members. His critiques were harsh and often bordered on personal attacks. "Johnson, your last project was a disaster. Do you even understand basic coding principles?" he sneered at one developer. The meeting dragged on, with Tom dominating the conversation and leaving little room for input from the team. When he finally opened the floor for questions and ideas, there was a moment of hesitation before Marcus, one of the most dedicated developers on the team, raised his hand. Marcus began to speak, his voice steady despite the nervousness evident in his posture. "I've been working on an innovative approach to our current project that could significantly improve efficiency," he said, reaching for his tablet to pull up some diagrams. Before Marcus could continue, Tom cut him off. "We don't have time for half-baked ideas," he said dismissively. "Stick to the plan we've outlined. If I wanted your opinion, I would have asked for it." The room fell silent, the air thick with tension. Marcus's face flushed with embarrassment as he lowered his hand and tablet. Other team members averted their eyes, relieved it wasn't them, but acutely aware that they could be next. As the meeting concluded, employees filed out quickly, eager to escape the oppressive atmosphere. Marcus lingered, gathering his materials slowly, his shoulders slumped in defeat. Tom approached him, his voice low but filled with contempt. "Listen, Johnson," Tom said, leaning in close. "I don't know how you got this job, but it's clear you're out of your depth here. This is a top-tier company, and we have standards. Standards that, frankly, you're not meeting." Marcus opened his mouth to respond, but Tom held up a hand, silencing him. "I don't want to hear your excuses. Just do your job and stay out of my way. Otherwise, you might find yourself without a job at all. Understood?" Without waiting for a response, Tom turned on his heel and strode out of the conference room, leaving Marcus alone with his thoughts. The encounter left Marcus feeling shaken and demoralized, questioning his place in the company and his abilities as a developer. As Marcus finally left the conference room, he couldn't help but notice the sympathetic glances from his colleagues. It was clear that Tom's behavior wasn't isolated to this incident, but rather a pattern that affected the entire team. The once vibrant and innovative atmosphere of the company had been slowly eroded by Tom's toxic leadership style. The tension that had been building in the office for weeks finally reached its breaking point. Tom Henderson stormed into the open workspace, his face contorted with rage. He made a beeline for Marcus's desk, drawing the attention of every employee in the vicinity. "Johnson," Tom bellowed, causing Marcus to flinch visibly. "My office. Now." The other employees watched in stunned silence as Marcus rose from his chair, his movements slow and deliberate. He followed Tom to the manager's office, acutely aware of the eyes following him. As soon as Marcus crossed the threshold, Tom slammed the door shut behind them. Inside the office, Tom wasted no time. "I've had enough of your incompetence," he spat, his words dripping with venom. "You're fired, effective immediately." Marcus stood there, momentarily frozen in disbelief. "But why? I've consistently met my targets. My last project was completed ahead of schedule and under budget." Tom's laugh was cold and mirthless. "Met your targets? Barely. You're not up to the standards of this company, Johnson. You never were. I should have done this months ago." As Marcus tried to defend himself, Tom cut him off. "Save it. HR will email you the details of your termination. Clear out your desk and be gone in the next hour." Dazed and confused, Marcus left Tom's office. The whispers and stares of his colleagues followed him as he walked back to his desk. With shaking hands, he began to pack up his belongings, his mind racing to process what had just happened. Sarah, a colleague he'd worked closely with on several projects, approached cautiously. "Marcus, what happened?" she asked, her voice low and concerned. "I've been fired," Marcus replied, the words feeling foreign on his tongue. "Tom says I'm not up to standards." Sarah's eyes widened in disbelief. "That's ridiculous. You're one of our best developers. This can't be right." But there was nothing to be done. Under the watchful eye of security, Marcus finished packing his things and made his way out of the building. As he stepped onto the busy New York street, the noise and bustle of the city seemed muted, overshadowed by the turmoil in his mind. Marcus walked aimlessly for a while, replaying the events in his head. He thought about his time at the company, the projects he'd completed, the praise he'd received from clients. None of it seemed to matter now. Eventually, he found himself in a small park. Sinking onto a bench, Marcus pulled out his phone and stared at it, wondering who to call. His finger hovered over his mother's contact. She had always been his rock, his source of strength. But how could he tell her he'd lost his job? Before he could make a decision, his phone rang. It was his mother. Taking a deep breath, Marcus answered. "Mom, Marcus, honey, are you sitting down?" His mother interrupted, her voice trembling with an emotion he couldn't quite place. "There's something I need to tell you. Something I should have told you a long time ago." Confused by her tone, Marcus replied, "Mom, what is it? Is everything okay?" There was a pause on the other end of the line, filled with the weight of years of secrets. Finally, his mother spoke again, her words changing everything Marcus thought he knew about himself and his place in the world. "Marcus, it's about your father, your real father. His name is Walter Johnson, and he's the owner of the company you work for." The world seemed to tilt on its axis as Marcus processed this information. Walter Johnson, the elusive owner of the tech giant he'd been working for, was his father. The implications of this revelation crashed over him in waves, momentarily pushing aside the sting of his unjust dismissal. As his mother continued to explain, filling in the gaps of a story that had been hidden from him for years, Marcus sat in stunned silence. The day that had started with the loss of his job had now turned into something he could never have imagined. With this new knowledge, Marcus realized that his fight against injustice at the company was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. Walter Johnson sat in his expansive office, staring at the computer screen in disbelief. He had just received an email notification about a recent termination. Marcus Johnson, one of the company's most promising developers. The name caught his attention immediately, stirring memories and emotions he had long suppressed. Without hesitation, Walter picked up his phone and dialed a number he rarely used. After a few rings, a familiar voice answered. "Hello." "Margaret, it's Walter," he said, his voice tense. "We need to talk about Marcus." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "You know," Margaret replied, her voice barely above a whisper, "I just found out he was fired. What's going on?" Walter demanded. Margaret sighed. I told him, Walter, about you, about everything. He needed to know. Walter leaned back in his chair, processing this information. After a moment of silence, he spoke again. I need to meet with him. Can you arrange it? Within hours, Walter found himself sitting in a small cafe, nervously tapping his fingers on the table. The bell above the door chimed, and he looked up to see Marcus enter, his face a mixture of confusion and apprehension. As Marcus approached the table, Walter stood, extending his hand. Marcus, thank you for coming. I'm Walter Johnson. Marcus shook his hand hesitantly. Mr. Johnson, I'm not sure why I'm here. Please sit. Walter gestured to the chair across from him. As they both settled, Walter took a deep breath. I understand you were let go from the company today. I want to hear your side of the story. Marcus, still reeling from the day's events, recounted his experiences with Tom Henderson, the unfair treatment, and his abrupt dismissal. As he spoke, Walter's expression darkened. This is unacceptable, Walter said firmly when Marcus finished. It goes against everything I've tried to build in this company. Marcus looked at him quizzically. With all due respect, Mr. Johnson, why do you care about my situation? Walter's eyes met Marcus's, and for a moment he saw a reflection of himself in the younger man's face. Because, he said softly, I'm your father, Marcus. The words hung in the air between them. Marcus sat back, his mind racing. So it's true, he murmured. My mother, she told me, but I couldn't quite believe it. Walter nodded. I know this is a lot to take in. I've made many mistakes, and not being there for you is my biggest regret. But I want to make things right, starting with this situation at the company. As they continued to talk, Walter shared his vision for the company, one of diversity, inclusion, and respect for all employees. He expressed his dismay at learning about the discriminatory practices that had taken root under Tom's leadership. I've been too removed from the day-to-day operations, Walter admitted, but that ends now. I want to make changes, Marcus, and I want your help to do it. Marcus listened intently, his initial shock giving way to a mix of emotions, anger at the years of absence, hope for the future, and a growing determination to fight against the injustices he and others had faced. What do you have in mind? Marcus asked, leaning forward. Walter's eyes lit up with resolve. First, we need to understand the full extent of the problem. I'm going to call an all-hands meeting. We need to create a safe space for employees to share their experiences. Will you help me organize this? Marcus nodded, feeling a sense of purpose he hadn't experienced in a long time. Yes, I will. As they continued to discuss their plans, the cafe bustled around them. Neither of them noticed the curious glances from other patrons, too engrossed in their conversation about reshaping the company's culture. By the time they left the cafe, the sun was setting over the city. Walter and Marcus stood on the sidewalk, the weight of their new connection and shared mission palpable between them. We have a lot of work ahead of us, Walter said, extending his hand once more. Marcus took it, his grip firm and determined. We do, but we're going to make a difference. As they parted ways, both men felt a sense of anticipation for what was to come. The revelation that had begun with a shocking dismissal was now evolving into something much larger, a catalyst for change that would ripple through the entire company. The company's largest conference room was packed to capacity. Employees from every department sat shoulder to shoulder, an air of nervous anticipation filling the space. At the front of the room, Walter Johnson stood alongside Marcus, both men exuding a mixture of determination and concern. Walter cleared his throat, silencing the murmurs that had been rippling through the crowd. Thank you all for coming, he began, his voice firm yet empathetic. I've called this meeting because it's come to my attention that there are serious issues within our company culture that need to be addressed. A wave of whispers swept through the room, but Walter held up his hand, continuing, "I want to create a safe space here today. I need to hear from you, all of you, about your experiences, good or bad. I want to know what's really happening in this company." For a moment, silence reigned. Then, hesitantly, a hand raised in the middle of the room. It belonged to Sarah, the Latina developer who had worked closely with Marcus. "Mr. Johnson," she began, her voice trembling slightly, "I've been with this company for 5 years, and in that time, I've faced constant microaggressions and outright discrimination." She went on to detail instances of being passed over for promotions, having her ideas dismissed, and enduring inappropriate comments about her heritage. As Sarah spoke, more hands began to rise. One by one, employees started sharing their stories. A black marketing executive recounted being told he was surprisingly articulate during a client meeting. An Asian programmer described being consistently mistaken for IT support. A transgender employee revealed the struggle of having their identity respected in the workplace. Marcus listened intently, his heart heavy with the realization that his experience wasn't isolated. He caught Walter's eye, noting the older man's clenched jaw and furrowed brow as he absorbed the flood of testimonies. As the meeting progressed, a pattern emerged. Tom Henderson's name came up repeatedly, his actions cast in an increasingly damning light. It became clear that his discriminatory behavior had seeped into every level of the company, creating a toxic environment that stifled creativity and crushed morale. When the last person had spoken, Walter stood again, his face a mask of controlled anger and determination. "I want to thank each and every one of you for your bravery today," he said. "What I've heard is unacceptable, and it stops now. I promise you, there will be changes." As the meeting adjourned, the room buzzed with a mix of emotions: relief at having finally spoken out, anxiety about potential repercussions, and hope for what might come next. Marcus found himself surrounded by colleagues, many reaching out to share more of their experiences or to express solidarity. In the midst of the crowd, he spotted Sarah making her way towards him. "Marcus," she said as she approached, her eyes bright with a newfound determination. "We need to talk. What happened in there? It can't end with just this meeting. We need to do more." Marcus nodded, feeling a surge of energy despite the emotional weight of the day. "You're right. We need a plan." Over the next few hours, Marcus and Sarah huddled in a small breakout room, brainstorming ideas. They drafted a proposal for a diversity and inclusion committee, outlined potential policy changes, and began compiling the stories they'd heard into a comprehensive report. As they worked, more employees trickled in, offering their support and input. What had started as a two-person effort quickly grew into a movement within the company. By the time they finished, it was well past midnight. Marcus looked around at the group that had formed, feeling a sense of cautious optimism. "This is just the beginning," he told them. "Tomorrow, we take this to Walter. We show him that we're ready to fight for real change." The group nodded in agreement, their faces showing a mix of exhaustion and determination. As they left the office, stepping out into the quiet New York night, there was a palpable sense that something significant had shifted. The individual struggles they had faced for so long had transformed into a collective fight for justice and equality within the company. Marcus walked home, his mind racing with plans and possibilities. The road ahead would be challenging, he knew, but for the first time in a long while, he felt hopeful about the future of the company and his place within it. The fight against discrimination had only just begun, but they were no longer fighting alone. The next morning, Marcus and Sarah stood outside Walter's office, a thick folder tucked under Marcus's arm. They exchanged a nervous glance before Marcus raised his hand and knocked firmly on the door. "Come in," Walter's voice called from inside. As they entered, Walter looked up from his desk, his expression a mix of curiosity and concern. "Marcus, Sarah, what can I do for you?" Marcus stepped forward, placing the folder on Walter's desk. "We've compiled a report, sir. It's not easy reading, but it's important." Walter opened the folder, his eyes widening as he scanned the first page. "What am I looking at here?" Sarah cleared her throat. "It's a comprehensive documentation of the discriminatory practices within the company, Mr. Johnson. We've collected testimonies, evidence of biased decision-making, and patterns of behavior that have created a hostile work environment." For the next hour, Marcus and Sarah walked Walter through the report. They presented statistics showing disparities in promotions and pay raises along racial and gender lines. They shared anonymized stories of harassment and discrimination, each one more disturbing than the last. Walter's face grew increasingly grim as he absorbed the information. When they finished, he sat back in his chair, running a hand over his face. "I had no idea it was this bad," he said, his voice heavy with regret. "I failed as a leader." Marcus leaned forward. "With respect, sir, it's not too late to make things right. We have some proposals." Sarah nodded, pulling out another document. "We'd like to establish a diversity and inclusion committee with representatives from all departments. We've outlined a series of policy changes and training programs that we believe could make a real difference." Walter listened intently as they outlined their plans. When they finished, he stood up and walked to the window, staring out at the city skyline for a long moment. Finally, he turned back to them. "You have my full support," he said, his voice firm with resolve. "I want you both to lead this committee. You'll report directly to me, and you'll have whatever resources you need to implement these changes." Marcus and Sarah exchanged a look of surprise and relief. "Thank you, Mr. Johnson," Marcus said. "We won't let you down." As they left Walter's office, the weight of the task ahead settled on their shoulders. They had won a crucial battle, but the war against discrimination in the workplace was far from over. Over the next few weeks, Marcus and Sarah threw themselves into their new roles. They organized the first meeting of the Diversity and Inclusion Committee, bringing together a diverse group of employees from across the company. The committee meetings were intense, filled with passionate discussions and sometimes heated debates. They tackled difficult topics head-on, from unconscious bias in hiring practices to the need for more inclusive language in company communications. As word spread about the committee's work, more employees came forward with their stories and ideas. The once silent majority found their voice, emboldened by the support from the top. However, not everyone was on board with the changes. Tom Henderson and his allies pushed back, arguing that the new initiatives were unnecessary and disruptive. Tensions in the office began to rise as the old guard clashed with those pushing for change. Despite the challenges, Marcus and Sarah pressed on. They implemented a series of workshops on unconscious bias, revamped the company's hiring practices, and established mentorship programs for underrepresented groups. Walter, true to his word, remained actively involved. He attended committee meetings, listened to concerns, and wasn't afraid to make tough decisions when necessary. As the weeks turned into months, small but significant changes began to take root. The atmosphere in the office shifted, becoming more open and inclusive. Employees from diverse backgrounds reported feeling more valued and heard. One afternoon, as Marcus and Sarah were reviewing the latest feedback from a company-wide survey, Walter stepped into their office. "I just wanted to say," he began, his voice filled with emotion, "that I'm proud of what you two have accomplished. We still have a long way to go, but you've started something important here." Marcus and Sarah stood, feeling a mix of pride and determination. They knew the road ahead would be challenging, but they were ready to face whatever came next. The fight for equality and inclusion in their workplace had only just begun, but already they could see the impact of their efforts. As Walter left, Marcus turned to Sarah. "Ready for the next challenge?" he asked with a smile. Sarah nodded, her eyes gleaming with determination. Always. Let's change this company, one step at a time. The tension in the conference room was palpable as employees filed in for the monthly team meeting. Marcus and Sarah sat near the front, their faces set with determination. Tom Henderson strode in last, his customary air of superiority seeming somewhat forced today. As Tom began his usual rundown of project statuses and targets, Marcus caught Sarah's eye. With a subtle nod, they both raised their hands. Tom, noticing the interruption, frowned. "Yes, Johnson? What is it?" Tom's voice dripped with barely concealed disdain. Marcus stood, his heart racing but his voice steady. "Tom, we need to address the elephant in the room. The discriminatory practices in this department can't continue." A collective gasp rippled through the room. Tom's face flushed red. "Excuse me? What are you talking about?" Sarah stood up next to Marcus. "We're talking about the consistent pattern of bias in project assignments, the dismissal of ideas from minority team members, and the hostile work environment you've created." Tom's eyes darted around the room, noting the mix of shocked and supportive faces. "This is ridiculous. I've always treated everyone fairly. You're just bitter because you can't meet the high standards I set." Marcus shook his head. "It's not about standards, Tom. It's about respect and equal opportunity. We have documentation of numerous instances where you've shown clear bias." As Marcus spoke, other team members began to voice their support. A young Indian developer recounted how Tom had repeatedly mispronounced her name despite corrections. An older black employee described being passed over for promotion in favor of less experienced white colleagues. Tom's face twisted with anger. "This is insubordination. I won't stand for this attack on my character." Just then, the door opened, and Walter Johnson walked in. The room fell silent. "I think I've heard enough," Walter said, his voice calm but authoritative. "Tom, my office. Now, the rest of you, please continue this meeting. Marcus, Sarah, I'd like you to lead the discussion on our new inclusivity initiatives." As Walter and Tom left the room, a mix of emotions swept through the employees. Some looked relieved, others worried, but there was an undeniable sense that a significant change was underway. Marcus and Sarah spent the next hour outlining the new policies and programs they'd been developing. They emphasized the importance of creating a workplace where everyone felt valued and heard. The team listened attentively, many offering suggestions and sharing their own experiences. Meanwhile, in Walter's office, Tom faced the consequences of his actions. Walter listened silently as Tom attempted to defend himself, making excuses and deflecting blame. When Tom finally ran out of words, Walter spoke. "Tom, I've known you for a long time. You've been a valuable asset to this company in many ways, but what I've learned about your behavior is unacceptable. It goes against everything this company stands for." Tom's face paled. "Walter, surely you can't believe all this. It's a misunderstanding." Walter held up his hand. "It's not a misunderstanding, Tom. It's a pattern of behavior that ends now. You have two choices. You can resign immediately, or you can stay on under probation, undergo extensive sensitivity training, and work under the direct supervision of our new Diversity and Inclusion Committee." Tom sat in stunned silence, the reality of his situation sinking in. After a long moment, he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. I'll need some time to think about this." Walter nodded. "Take the rest of the day. I expect your decision by tomorrow morning." As Tom left Walter's office, he walked past the conference room where the team meeting was still in progress. Through the glass, he could see Marcus and Sarah at the front, engaging with the team in a way he never had. The energy in the room was palpable, even from outside. For the first time, Tom began to realize the full impact of his actions. The world he had known, the power he had wielded so carelessly, was crumbling around him. As he gathered his things and left the office, he knew that regardless of his decision, things would never be the same. Back in the conference room, the meeting was wrapping up. There was a newfound sense of unity among the team members. As people filed out, many stopped to thank Marcus and Sarah for their courage. Marcus and Sarah exchanged a look of cautious optimism. They had faced the confrontation head-on, and while the outcome was still uncertain, they had taken a crucial step towards creating the inclusive workplace they envisioned. The fight was far from over, but today, they had won an important battle. The next morning, a tense atmosphere enveloped the office. Employees huddled in small groups, whispering and speculating about what would happen. Marcus and Sarah arrived early, both feeling a mix of anticipation and anxiety. At precisely 9 a.m., Walter's voice came over the intercom system. "All employees, please gather in the main conference room immediately." As people filed into the room, Marcus noticed Tom standing in a corner, his face ashen and his usual bravado nowhere to be seen. Walter stood at the front, his expression grave but determined. Once everyone was seated, Walter cleared his throat. "Thank you all for coming. I have an important announcement to make." He paused, his eyes scanning the room. Effective immediately, Tom Henderson is no longer employed by this company. A collective gasp echoed through the room. Some employees looked shocked, others relieved, while a few of Tom's closest allies appeared angry and confused. Walter continued, his voice steady. This decision was not made lightly. However, after careful consideration and review of substantial evidence, it became clear that Mr. Henderson's actions and leadership style were incompatible with the values of inclusivity and respect that we strive to uphold. He went on to outline some of the issues that had been brought to light, careful not to name specific individuals, but painting a clear picture of the toxic environment that had been allowed to fester. "I want to assure all of you," Walter said, his tone softening, "that this company is committed to creating a workplace where everyone feels valued, respected, and has equal opportunities to succeed. We have failed in this regard in the past, but that changes now." As Walter spoke about the new initiatives and policies being implemented, Marcus caught Sarah's eye. They shared a small, triumphant smile. Their hard work was paying off. Suddenly, Tom's voice cut through the room. "This is ridiculous," he shouted, his face red with anger. "You're destroying everything we've built, Walter. You'll regret this." Security guards, who had been quietly stationed near Tom, now moved closer. Walter remained calm. "Tom, please leave the premises quietly. Your personal items will be sent to you." As the guards escorted Tom out, he pointed at Marcus. This is your fault. You and your diversity nonsense. You haven't heard the last of me, Johnson." The door closed behind Tom, leaving a stunned silence in its wake. Walter waited a moment before speaking again. "I apologize for that outburst. It only reinforces the necessity of the changes we're making." He then introduced Marcus and Sarah as the leaders of the new Diversity and Inclusion Committee, inviting them to share more about their plans for the company. As Marcus stood to address the room, he felt a weight lift from his shoulders. The road ahead would still be challenging, but a major obstacle had been removed. He looked out at his colleagues, seeing hope and curiosity in their faces. "Thank you, Walter," Marcus began. "What we're embarking on isn't just about removing negative influences. It's about actively creating a positive, inclusive environment where everyone can thrive." For the next hour, Marcus and Sarah outlined their vision for the company's future. They discussed new hiring practices, mentorship programs, and ongoing education initiatives. They emphasized that this was a collaborative effort and invited input from everyone. As the meeting concluded, there was a palpable sense of excitement in the room. Employees lingered, discussing ideas and sharing their thoughts. Many approached Marcus and Sarah, offering support, or asking how they could get involved. Walter watched from the sidelines, a mix of pride and determination on his face. He knew there would be challenges ahead. Tom's angry departure suggested potential legal battles, and changing a company culture wouldn't happen overnight. But seeing the energy and unity in the room, he felt confident they were on the right path. As the last of the employees filed out, Walter approached Marcus and Sarah. "Well done, both of you," he said warmly. "This is just the beginning, but it's a strong start." Marcus nodded, feeling a surge of emotion. "Thank you for trusting us with this, Walter. We won't let you down." Sarah added, "We're ready for whatever comes next." As they left the conference room, the three of them knew that a new chapter had begun for the company. The dismissal of Tom was more than just the removal of one problematic individual. It was a clear statement about the company's values and a commitment to a more inclusive future. The real work was just beginning, but for the first time in a long while, the future looked bright with possibility. In the weeks following Tom's dismissal, the company underwent a transformation. Marcus and Sarah, now officially heading the Diversity and Inclusion Committee, wasted no time in implementing their plans. Their first order of business was to revamp the hiring process. They introduced blind resume reviews to reduce unconscious bias and established diverse interview panels. The HR department underwent extensive training on inclusive hiring practices. Marcus stood before a group of department heads, explaining the new approach. "We're not lowering our standards," he emphasized. "We're widening our net to ensure we're not missing out on top talent due to preconceived notions." Simultaneously, Sarah spearheaded a series of company-wide workshops. These sessions covered topics ranging from unconscious bias to cultural competency. Attendance was mandatory for all employees, including top executives. During one such workshop, Sarah addressed a room full of employees. "Inclusion isn't just about hiring diverse candidates," she explained. "It's about creating an environment where everyone feels valued and can contribute their best work." The changes weren't always smooth. Some longtime employees, particularly those who had been close to Tom, resisted the new initiatives. There were grumblings about political correctness gone too far and fears of lowering standards. Marcus and Sarah faced these challenges head-on. They organized open forums where employees could voice their concerns and ask questions. Through patient explanation and concrete examples, they gradually won over many of the skeptics. One afternoon, a senior developer named Mike approached Marcus after a particularly heated forum. "I'll be honest," Mike said, "I was against all this at first. But seeing how it's already improving team dynamics, I get it now. How can I help?" This willingness to learn and adapt became increasingly common as the benefits of the new policies began to show. Team collaboration improved, and innovative ideas started flowing more freely as people felt more comfortable sharing their unique perspectives. 3 months into the new regime, Walter called Marcus and Sarah into his office. "I've been looking at the numbers," he said, gesturing to a report on his desk. "Employee satisfaction is up 30%. We're seeing a 25% increase in diverse applicants for open positions, and project completion rates have improved by 15%. Marcus and Sarah exchanged proud smiles. Their hard work was paying off in tangible ways. "But we can't rest on our laurels," Sarah said. "There's still so much to do." Walter nodded in agreement. "Which is why I'm increasing the budget for your committee. I want to expand these initiatives company-wide to all our offices globally." The news energized Marcus and Sarah. They spent the next few weeks developing a comprehensive plan for global implementation, taking into account cultural differences and local challenges in each of the company's international offices. As part of this expansion, they organized a company-wide virtual town hall. Employees from offices around the world tuned in to hear about the changes and ask questions. Marcus addressed the global audience, his voice filled with passion. "We're not just changing policies," he said. "We're changing our company culture. We're creating a place where innovation thrives because every voice is heard and valued." Sarah followed up, adding, "This isn't a one-time initiative. It's an ongoing commitment to growth and inclusion. We're setting a new standard, not just for our company, but for the entire tech industry." The response was overwhelmingly positive. Employees from Delhi to Dublin expressed their excitement about the changes and eagerness to get involved. As the town hall concluded, Walter joined Marcus and Sarah on screen. "This is the future of our company," he declared. "A future where diversity drives innovation, where inclusivity is the norm, not the exception. And it's all thanks to the courage and vision of these two individuals." Marcus and Sarah, though appreciative of the praise, knew that this was just the beginning. They had laid a strong foundation, but building a truly inclusive company would be an ongoing process. As they left Walter's office that day, they paused to look out over the bustling office floor. The scene before them was noticeably different from just a few months ago. There was a new energy, a sense of openness and collaboration that hadn't existed before. "We've come a long way," Marcus mused. Sarah nodded in agreement. "And we've got a long way to go, but we're on the right path." Together, they stepped forward, ready to face the challenges and opportunities that lay ahead in their quest to create a truly inclusive workplace. While the company was undergoing positive changes, Tom Henderson was not taking his dismissal lightly. Sitting in his home office, surrounded by empty coffee cups and crumpled papers, Tom's eyes were fixed on his computer screen, dark circles underneath them, betraying his lack of sleep. "They think they can just throw me away," Tom muttered to himself, his fingers flying across the keyboard. He was crafting a series of social media posts, each one more vitriolic than the last, aimed at discrediting Marcus and the company's new direction. Tom's first move was to create anonymous accounts on various platforms. He began spreading rumors about the company's supposed decline in quality since his departure. "Diversity hires ruining tech giant," read one of his posts, which quickly gained traction in certain online circles. Meanwhile, back at the company, Marcus was in the middle of a meeting when his phone buzzed incessantly. Excusing himself, he stepped out to find a flood of notifications. His heart sank as he scrolled through the messages, seeing screenshots of the defamatory posts. Sarah joined him in the hallway, her face etched with concern. "Have you seen what's happening online?" she asked. Marcus nodded grimly. "It has to be Tom. This smear campaign. It's too personal, too specific." They quickly briefed Walter on the situation. His response was immediate and decisive. "We're not going to let this derail all the progress we've made," he stated firmly. "Get our PR team on this right away. We need to counter these false narratives with facts and transparency." Over the next few days, the company went into damage control mode. They released statements highlighting the improved performance metrics since the implementation of their diversity initiatives. Employees were encouraged to share their positive experiences on social media, creating a flood of authentic stories that began to drown out Tom's fabricated claims. But Tom wasn't finished. He reached out to his old contacts in the industry, trying to turn them against the company. Some, still clinging to outdated views, were receptive to his rhetoric. Others, however, saw through his bitterness and distanced themselves from him. One evening, as Marcus was leaving the office, he found Mike, the senior developer, who had initially been skeptical of the changes, waiting for him by his car. "Marcus, I need to tell you something," Mike said, his voice low. "Tom reached out to me. He's trying to gather insider information, anything he can use against the company. He offered me money." Marcus felt a mix of anger and gratitude. "Thank you for telling me, Mike. This is exactly the kind of underhanded tactic we need to be aware of." Armed with this information, Marcus and Sarah worked with the legal team to draft cease and desist letters to Tom. They also implemented stricter confidentiality measures within the company to prevent any potential leaks. Despite these efforts, Tom's campaign was taking a toll. Some potential clients, unsettled by the online controversy, were hesitating to sign contracts. A few employees, feeling the pressure of the negative attention, were considering leaving. In response, Walter decided to take a bold step. He called for a press conference, inviting journalists from major tech publications. On the day of the event, Walter stood before the cameras, flanked by Marcus and Sarah. "I want to address the rumors and accusations that have been circulating," Walter began, his voice steady and confident. "These attacks are baseless, motivated by one individual's inability to adapt to a changing world. But rather than merely deny them, I want to show you the reality of our company today." He proceeded to present concrete data showing the company's improved performance, innovative new projects, and increased employee satisfaction. He invited several employees from diverse backgrounds to speak about their experiences and the positive changes they'd witnessed. As the press conference concluded, Walter made a final statement. "We are not perfect, and we still have work to do. But we are committed to creating a workplace that reflects the diversity of the world we live in. Because we believe that diversity drives innovation and inclusion makes us stronger." The press conference was a turning point. The tide of public opinion began to shift, with many praising the company's transparency and commitment to change. Tom's accusations began to lose their sting as more and more people saw through his bitter motivations. In the aftermath, Marcus and Sarah found themselves in Walter's office once again. "You've handled this crisis admirably," Walter said, a hint of pride in his voice. "But let this be a lesson. The road to true inclusion will have its obstacles. There will always be those who resist change, who cling to the old ways. Our job is to keep moving forward, to prove them wrong through our actions and our success." Marcus and Sarah nodded, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. They had weathered this storm, and in doing so, had grown stronger. As they left Walter's office, they knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they were ready to face them head-on. Tom's attempt at revenge had ultimately failed, serving only to reinforce the company's commitment to its new path. The future, despite the recent turbulence, looked brighter than ever. 6 months had passed since Tom's smear campaign, and the company was thriving under its new inclusive policies. Marcus and Sarah were in Walter's office, reviewing the latest quarterly report, when Walter's assistant burst in. "Sir, you need to see this," she said, handing Walter a tablet. Walter's eyes widened as he watched the screen. "Get Marcus and Sarah up to speed," he instructed, passing them the tablet. On the screen was a video of Tom Henderson, clearly inebriated, ranting to someone off camera. "You want to know the truth?" Tom slurred. "I'll tell you the truth. All that diversity nonsense, it works. But I couldn't let them know that. I had to keep the old boys club intact, you know? Had to keep us on top." Marcus and Sarah exchanged shocked glances as Tom continued his drunken confession, admitting to deliberately suppressing ideas from minority employees, manipulating performance reviews, and creating a hostile work environment to maintain his power structure. "Where did this come from?" Marcus asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Walter sighed heavily. "It was anonymously sent to every major tech publication and news outlet an hour ago. It's already going viral." The implications of this revelation were staggering. Tom's inadvertent confession not only vindicated their efforts, but also exposed the deep-rooted issues they had been fighting against. "We need to get ahead of this," Sarah said, her mind already racing with potential strategies. Walter nodded in agreement. "Call an emergency all-hands meeting. We need to address this with our employees before they hear it from somewhere else." Within the hour, the entire company was gathered in the main auditorium, a mix of confusion and anticipation on their faces. Walter took the stage, with Marcus and Sarah by his side. By now, many of you may have seen or heard about a video circulating online. Walter began. I want to address this directly and transparently. He played a carefully edited version of Tom's confession, gasps and murmurs rippling through the audience. When it ended, Walter continued, "This revelation is shocking and deeply disturbing. It confirms the systemic issues we've been working to address and underscores the importance of our ongoing efforts towards inclusivity." Marcus stepped forward. "We understand that this may bring up difficult emotions and experiences for many of you. We want you to know that we're here to listen, to support you, and to continue our work in creating a truly equitable workplace." Sarah added, "This is a turning point. We have irrefutable proof of the harm caused by discriminatory practices. But more importantly, we have proof that our new direction is the right one." The meeting continued with a Q&A session, allowing employees to voice their concerns and feelings. The atmosphere was charged with a mix of anger, vindication, and determination. In the following days, the company was thrust into the spotlight. News outlets clamored for interviews, industry leaders reached out to express support, and competitors scrambled to examine their own practices. Walter, Marcus, and Sarah found themselves at the forefront of a broader conversation about diversity and inclusion in the tech industry. They were invited to speak at conferences, contribute to industry publications, and consult with other companies looking to improve their practices. Amidst the whirlwind of attention, Marcus received an unexpected call. It was from the district attorney's office. Tom's confession had sparked a broader investigation into discriminatory practices in the tech industry, and they wanted Marcus's cooperation. After careful consideration and discussions with Walter and the legal team, Marcus agreed to assist the investigation. His testimony, along with the evidence they had gathered over the months, became instrumental in building a case not just against Tom, but against a network of executives who had perpetuated discriminatory practices across multiple companies. As the legal proceedings unfolded, the company continued to push forward with its inclusive initiatives. The publicity from Tom's confession had an unexpected benefit, a surge of applications from diverse, highly qualified candidates who were drawn to the company's commitment to equality. 1 year after Tom's video went viral, Marcus found himself back in Walter's office. But this time, he wasn't there as an employee. "I'm proud to announce," Walter said, beaming, "that the board has unanimously voted to appoint you as the new Chief Technology Officer of the company." Marcus was stunned. "Walter, I don't know what to say." Walter clapped him on the shoulder. "You've earned this, Marcus. Your leadership through all of this has been exemplary, and I can't think of anyone better to lead us into the future." As Marcus left the office, still processing the news, he ran into Sarah in the hallway. Her smile told him she already knew. "Congratulations, CTO," she said, pulling him into a hug. "Ready to change the world?" Marcus grinned, feeling a surge of excitement for the challenges ahead. "More than ready. Let's do this." As they walked together towards the main work area, Marcus reflected on the journey that had brought him to this point. From facing discrimination to leading the charge for change, from being unjustly fired to becoming CTO, it had been a roller coaster of a year. But looking at the diverse, vibrant team working harmoniously around him, Marcus knew that every struggle had been worth it. They had not only transformed their company, but had sparked a movement that was reshaping the entire industry. The story of their fight against discrimination, initially silenced but ultimately triumphant, had become a beacon of hope and a catalyst for change. And this, Marcus realized, was just the beginning of a new chapter, not just for him, but for the future of technology and workplace equality.